Hidden things you never knew about King Solomon in the Bible. Please, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, do so by doing so, and also like this channel and share it so that it can get to more people. So the life of King Solomon is perhaps one of my favorite wells to draw inspiration and wisdom. It's easy to gloss over the complexities, but there are so many layers to unpack. It's a story of loss, strategy, triumph, and tragedy. When it comes to Solomon, we are talking about the son of one of the most powerful kings who ever lived, whose mother was seduced and her first husband was sent to his death. We are talking about a man who witnessed as his family turned on each other for the sake of greed or revenge. A man whose sister was raped by a half brother. A man who received the greatest wisdom and wealth ever bestowed, and yet he drew it all away by putting the love of women before his love of God. In the books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, Solomon passed down his inspired wisdom to teach us how to avoid the same mistakes. So let's talk about the adultery of King David, which is Solomon's dad, and his mother. Okay, so King David, everyone knows the story of David and Goliath. It's a childhood classic. The smaller, younger David defeated the 9-foot giant of a man in Goliath by slinging a stone to the Philistines' head. Of course, it wasn't David acting on his own. God Jehovah was with him. It was God who guided the stone that killed Goliath. So when David became king with God's backing, he set out to expand Israel's borders and eliminate God's enemies. We are talking about pagans who worship false gods and sacrifice their children, an abomination in the eyes of Jehovah. So yes, while David was known for his musical talent, dancing in the streets with his people and his zeal to do what's good in God's eye, he was also a warrior king. He killed thousands. And though he clearly had a love for God, David wasn't perfect. That's not to make light of what he did. What King David did was horrible, diabolical, even by today's standards. David was already married with children of his own. And in 2 Samuel chapter 11, we learn that while David had sent his commanders and soldiers out to fight the nations of Syria and Ammon, David stayed in Jerusalem. So one afternoon, as he was walking on the rooftop of his home, King David spotted Bathsheba batting from afar. The Bible described her as a very beautiful woman. David sent to inquire about her. He learned that she was married to one of his soldiers, Uriah, but still had sex with her anyway. And when David found out she was pregnant, he attempted what we see a lot of people doing more and more these days, paternity fraud. So when King David found out Bathsheba was pregnant, the first thing he attempted was to facilitate paternity fraud. As if bedding his soldier's wife wasn't bad enough, David brought Uriah back from the war and encouraged Uriah to lay with his wife for a night before going back to the war. But Uriah wanted to be a good soldier and set an example for his men, didn't go home. He slept alongside the other servants and told King David that he couldn't in good conscience go home and enjoy his wife, knowing that his brothers in arms were at war. So David smoothed him some more with drinks and then sent him back to the field. In 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 14, we learn the king David wrote to the commander and said, "Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die." When Bathsheba learned that Uriah had been killed, it's written that she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent to have her brought to his house, and she became his wife. These were the parents of King Solomon. Just because all this is written in the Bible, it doesn't mean God approves of such behavior. So let's talk about King Solomon's brothers, which are David's children. When it comes to King David, most people know about his son. They know about Solomon. The thing is, King David had 8 wives. He had over 18 sons and daughters. Some were half brothers and sisters, and some had the same mom and same fathers. This is very important to keep in mind. So before Solomon had risen to prominence as David's most famous son, there was another. So let's talk about Solomon's ascension to the throne. As King David's eventful life was drawing to a close, time came for him to pick his successor. Who would be the next ruler of one of the most powerful nations in the known world? Well, King David swore to Belshazzar that their son Solomon would be his successor. In 1 Chronicles chapter 28 verse 9, King David tells Solomon to know the God of Israel with a whole heart and a willingly mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. This is something no one should take lightly. When it comes to our Heavenly Father, there is no privacy. Your thoughts are not hidden from His sight. Your wants, your motives, your emotions, God sees it all. So Solomon was taught this as a young man, even before God appeared to him in his dream. Think about it. As King David lay dying, charging, and trusting his beloved Israel to his son Solomon, Solomon had already seen so much. He knew his father's mistake, his triumphs and losses. He witnesses the conflicts and internal strife of his older brothers, and it wasn't over yet. Why David had chosen Solomon to be the next king, Solomon still had another older brother who tried to seize the throne. The name of the older brother is Adonijah. He is the fourth son of King David, Solomon's older half-brother from a different mother. In a classic power move, Adonijah started drawing support from court officials, notably the commander of the army, Joab, and other priests in a plot to usurp the throne. In 1 Kings chapter 1, we see that Adonijah had a feast with sacrificed animal, inviting all his brothers except for Solomon. This right here should tell you that Adonijah was at least aware of his father's wishes and was willing to defy him. All of this took place while David was still alive. Nevertheless, King David had Solomon anointed as the next king of Israel. Solomon took the throne with much rejoicing, the city in uproar and trumpets blaring. The celebration was so loud that Adonijah could hear it from their feast some distance away. When he asked what was going on, he learned that Solomon was installed as king. At this point, Adonijah became fearful with his guests, and they begin to go on their way when they learned that Solomon has installed the king. So when King David died and Solomon's reign began, in 2 Kings chapter 2, we read that the matter of Adonijah isn't over. Moreover, we see that Solomon's mother Bathsheba plays a significant role in Solomon's life. You can see he truly cares and cherishes her when he stood up to greet her and bow to her. So he requests that a seat be brought to her by his throne. In 1 Kings chapter 2, Solomon's big brother Adonijah approaches Solomon's mother Bathsheba in a last-ditch effort to gain prominence. Adonijah asks Bathsheba to go to Solomon and asks that a woman named Abishag, the Shunammite, to be made Adonijah's wife. Bathsheba agrees to do this. To Bathsheba, this was just an innocent request. What harm could it do to give Adonijah a wife? I think that really shows her heart. Not a schemer, not one of plots or intrigues. Meanwhile, laugh out loud. You really learn a lot about Solomon's character in his response, which I love so much. Remember, God hadn't appeared in his dream yet to grant him his wish to wisdom. So Solomon's reaction and response are mainly due to his experience at so young an age, a discerning mind crafted by the years of witnessing so much betrayal and heartache from schemes and deception. So immediately Solomon heard about this, he discerned that Adonijah's request for Abishag's hand in marriage was a tactic. You see, Abishag was a young beautiful woman who was with King David's side at the time of his death. Some sources say that Abishag was a concubine of sorts. So to give you a recap in case you haven't read, Solomon is the new king of the powerful nation of Israel, the third king in fact, following the succession of King Saul. Then his father King David, an extraordinary man who was said to have a heart after God himself. Solomon had a very turbulent upbringing. His mother was seduced while still married to another man. His eldest half-brother raped his half-sister. Another half-brother, the popular Absalom, tried to take the throne from his father King David. And why David swore to make Solomon the next king, Another half-brother tried to usurp the throne through nefarious schemes. Now we pick it up in 1 Kings chapter 3. Here we read that Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. It's here that we learn that about God appearing to Solomon in a dream and saying, "Ask what I shall give you." So when God asked the young king Solomon for what he wanted, one would think he would ask for money, power, success on the battlefield, fame or glory, right? Nope. Starting in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 7, Solomon said, "You have made your servant king in place of David, my father, although I am but a little child, and your servant is in the midst of your great chosen people. Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil." In verse 10, we learn how Solomon's request pleased God. It says, "It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding, to discern what is right. Behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you." In verse 13, God goes on to say, "I will give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my always, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." After the dream where Solomon asked for wisdom, we see the astonishing display of intelligence that most people are familiar with. This is the incident where two quarreling women bring a baby before Solomon, each claiming to be the child's mother. Two pregnant women were living in the same house. Both gave birth within days of each other. The baby of one mother died because she laid on him, while the baby of the other lived. And in the middle of the night, the mother of the dead baby stole the living baby and replaced it with the dead one. King Solomon says in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 24, "Bring me a sword." So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, "Divide the living child in two and give half to the one and half to the other." That's when the mother of the living child cried out, "Oh my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death." But the other said, "He shall be neither mine nor yours, divide him." That is how the baby was given to her real mother. So, just as God had told Solomon, the king's wealth continued to increase as the days went by. In 1 Kings chapter 4, we learn that the lands of his empire had extended to border next to Egypt. He had dominion over the Euphrates, and there was peace. Verse 26 tells us that he had 40,000 stores of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. It said that his wisdom surpassed all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005, and people of all nations came to hear his wisdom. Among his crowning achievements was the building of the temple. This was to be the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments Moses collected, written by God's own hand. Until then, the Ark was moved about in sacred tents called the tabernacle. This was important to Solomon because ever since his father was king, David dreamed of creating a great and magnificent temple to house the ark. It was during David's reign that he began amassing the materials to build it, such as timber and gold. But alas, David was not permitted to construct the temple because he had shed so much blood. Too many years war in his years. Thus, the charge was passed down to Solomon. It took Solomon 7 years from foundation to finish the tabernacle. And what's interesting is in 1 Kings chapter 7, we learn that Solomon concentrated his efforts on building the temple of God before he worked on building his own palace. As awesome as Solomon was to have accomplished so much and praising God's name, in 1 Kings chapter 9, we learn that God appeared to Solomon in a dream a second time. What is remarkable about this dream is that it reinforces what we discussed earlier, the conditions of God's blessing. In chapter 9, God appears to Solomon and commends him for building the temple and recognizes it, a positive compliment as a father to his son. But again, God tells Solomon, if you walk before me with integrity in your heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever. In verse 6, God warns, but if you turn aside from following me, you and your children, and if you people do not keep my commandments and my statutes, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name. I will cast out my sight, and this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by, it will be astonished, and they will say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt and laid hold on other gods and worshipped them. I believe the reason why God appeared and warned Solomon specifically about being led astray and worshiping false gods was because he knows our hearts since the very beginning. So for God to appear to Solomon, not once but twice, warning him, reminding him of the consequences, I believe it shows more genuine love and care from God to Solomon. I believe Solomon really did endeavor to put God first and exalt him to the best of his abilities, as was demonstrated when he prioritized building the temple of God before building his own palace. But Solomon was beautiful. I imagine he had to be the son of a woman who was so mesmerizing that David caved into temptation and had Bathsheba's husband killed after bedding her. If Solomon inherited these genes and that of his father, can you imagine the celebrity and sex appeal that added with his wealth, intellect, and the talent for songwriting? I imagine women far and wide must have found him irresistible. One of the most cerebral books of the Bible is the Song of Solomon. It really is so sweet. It will make your teeth hot. I wouldn't recommend it if you have just been dumped or you are in the midst of an unrequited love. Many believe Solomon wrote this song in dedication to his first wife. In 1 Kings chapter 3, we learn that Solomon also married the Pharaoh's daughter as part of a political alliance. Not much is revealed in scripture about how he amassed the 698 other wives or the 300 concubines, but we do learn of its devastating consequences. And I hope you read this with a compassionate heart, because the biggest lesson you are about to read is not only how Solomon viewed himself, but that of his bloodline and future generations. In chapter 11, we read that King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh. It gives a list of several ethnicities, but the main concern was the fact that many of these women worshipped false gods. Starting in verse 4, it says that when Solomon was old, his wife turned away his heart after other gods. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is huge and tragic. Solomon the king, who built the great and glorious temple of God with such joyous celebration, leading his people in worship, where God himself made his presence known. This same Solomon turned away from God to worship false gods, and it was because he married unbelieving spouses. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share. Thank you for watching.